and compete against them. And the answer was, in order to set up another railroad, you had to get permission from the California State House or the politicians. And these guys bought the politicians. See, in a private market, if there were no rule that you had to have permission from somebody to set up a competing railroad, the last thing these guys want is to have another railroad. See, potential competition, even though they're the only railroad, they will act reasonably because they don't want another railroad to be built. So you don't need 65,000 railways to have competition. Just potential competition will make sure that these guys behave themselves and don't act in an arbitrary and capricious manner. Yes?
The Swiss system of self-defense might be the example to use against that.
The Swiss, very good point about the Swiss defense. Switzerland was I think one of the only countries, if not the only country in Europe that didn't get involved in any wars. Everyone's got a rifle there. They live in the mountains, and Hitler said, well, you know, I could probably take Switzerland, but that would pretty much end me. If people had guns, you know, in my school there were a bunch of rapes that occurred. And I said, you know, one of the Olympic events is pistol shooting. And what me and my co-author, Bill Barnett, in this case again, we wrote an article in the local paper, and we said we should set up a girls' pistol shooting team. And I tell you, I wouldn't want to rape any student there because you don't know who's packing heat. There was this case in Kennesaw, Georgia, where there were a lot of rapes, and there they had an unlibertarian law that everyone had to have a gun, compulsory. And you also had a concealed carry permit, which meant you had to learn how to shoot the gun. So you'd have women out there shooting guns and learning how to clean them, and you'll never guess what happened to the rape rate. You'd be shocked. And in nobody rapes anyone in the middle of a police station.
Well,
I mean,
accepted.
Yes. Guy in the blue shirt.
Yeah. Given our current state of affairs, how would you bring about the privatization of private defense?
How would you bring about the privatization of private defense? Well, again, this is sort of like unscrambling the omelet or the scrambled egg. You know, right now, there are more private police in this country than there are public police. Look, you go to Disney World and you start acting a little weirdly, and there'll be Minnie Mouse over here and Donald Duck over there, and they'll grab your elbows and they say, please come with me, and they're packing heat. And Disney World's a pretty safe place. Walmart has got private police, a lot of malls have got private police. Well, what are the public police doing? Mainly, they're putting people in jail for victimless crimes. Those jails are filled to the 60% level with people guilty of drugs. You just wouldn't have that in the case of private police, because people would have to pay extra for that, and why would they want to? They'll only pay for protection. Before I call on people for a second time, I want to call on other people. Yes, way in the back?
What would you do with something like flora that only grows on somebody else's land that's endangered and will be found there? So if they're willing to let something go extinct that you're willing to preserve and it's only found on their property, how do you go about that if they're not willing to deal with you?
Well, you know, there was this case, Anderson and Leal, who are free market environmentalists. They're pretty good. They're sort of Chicagoite in that Austrian case. Still pretty good. And they had this example of dinosaur eggs that are very rare. And some guy found them, and he didn't care about dinosaurs, but the dinosaur egg aficionados said, look, we'll pay you big bucks. Yes, if there was a malcontent or a misanthrope or a person who hated humanity, and he found a dinosaur egg or he found a special species of whatever, and other people were offering him millions of dollars and he still wouldn't do it, tough. We lose one species. But you know, we lose hundreds of species every year. We don't even, biologists haven't even calculated all the species we've got. What's the optimal number of species? Every species that ever existed? I mean, it's not just the dinosaurs that have gone extinct. Many, many species have gone extinct. We can't save them all.
1 every 10 minutes.
The linchpin for libertarianism is non-aggression principles, so we're dealing in the realm of principles. And yet it seems like homesteading and first appropriation, the definition of appropriation, is that something you think is principle-based, or is that really only something that the market would be able to determine community by community what actual appropriation requires?
Well,
Mixing your labor is kind of
mixing your labor.
up for interpretation.
Yes, I think that's a very good point. The question was, is homesteading airtight, put it in my words, or is there a lot of give in this? And there is some give in this. If I'm gonna homestead land, do I have to put a corn plant every square foot, every square yard, every square acre, every square mile? The way Murray Rothbard answers that is, it depends upon the context of where you're at. Just like, remember I said with the ad column, how far below the land do you have to build, or can you go under? It depends upon what the terrain is like. Well, east of the Mississippi, people could live on 160 acres because the land was fertile, and you would have intensive agriculture. West of the Mississippi, you would have extensive agriculture because the land was less fertile, more desert-like. So it depends upon the context. When private enterprise goes to the moon or the Mars, who's going to own what? Well, you can't plant things there. I mean, let's say it's very difficult. You might have a hothouse. You have to have some sort of rule of reason. I mean, we have continuum problems all throughout law. For example, what should the right statutory rape age be? When can a girl give consent? Well, we know a 5-year-old girl can't give consent, and we know a 25-year-old woman can. Well, where's the cutoff point? Is it 15? Is it 16? Is it 14? There's a lot of give in there.
Sure, but that's pointing to a market discovery process, which is the correct answer, that nobody knows entrepreneurial questions because for the market to decide. However, since it's the very foundation of the system, in order to define what aggression actually is, it seems like you actually have to get a communal consensus on what aggression counts as before you can actually
Well, you
apply
have
the
to use
principle.
some sort of reasonable man standard, and what I'm saying is in a fertile area, you just can't put one plant every mile and say you own it. You have to put a lot more plants there. How many more? I don't know. But it's the same thing with aggression. Look, suppose I go like that right now to you, and you pull out a gun and shoot me. Am I a victim, or am I the perpetrator? Clearly, you're the perpetrator, I'm the victim, because in this context, you know I'm not going to hurt you. I mean, I'm just using this as an example as a professor. I'm way too far away to hurt you. But on the other hand, if we were in a dark alley, and I came at you with something that glinted, and I'm about to do this to you, and you shot me, then you'd be defensive, not offensive. Well, how far away does the person have to be before you can take defensive action? It depends on the context. It depends upon some sort of reasonable man standard. The burden of proof is on he who wants to put the person in jail, but in other words, there's give in everything. Statutory rape age, aggression, homesteading, and to say that the libertarian theory is problematic because we don't have a cut and dried answer, I think is too harsh a criticism.
That's not the implication. I'm just saying that it seems like it'd be more communal based. So, for example, the mutualists would have their idea, and Georges and ANCAPs.
I see. We are agreeing. Yes, I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I wasn't as
it
critical.
would be based on the context of the community. The Amish community might do it one way. The other people, the hippies, might do it another way. So I think we agree. Yes, sir. In the green shirt.
Which green shirt?
Isn't that green? Looks green.
Yeah. Isn't it sort of questions like that coming up with answers that sort of give rise to states in the first place? It's sort of green on ground rule.
Well,
And wouldn't a
the
system,
question isn't
wouldn't
answers
they
to the
naturally
previous
develop?
question, why states arose in the first place.
Or not so much why did they, but I imagine a public, quote-unquote, legal system, that's essentially its purpose, is to agree on ground rules for the interaction that you do with it. So wouldn't those kinds of issues naturally give rise to states?
Well, I see states as criminal bands. I don't see states as ways of coming together and agreeing on ground rules. I see states as inherently invasive. I don't see why you can't have private law